Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. I'm Dr. Daniel Amen.
And I'm Tana Amen. Here we teach you how to win the fight for your brain to defeat anxiety, depression, memory loss, ADHD, and addictions.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is brought to you by Amen Clinics, where we've transformed lives for 3 decades using brain SPECT imaging to better target treatment and natural ways to heal the brain. For more information, visit amenclinics.com.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is also brought to you by BrainMD, where we produce the highest quality nutraceutical products to support the health of your brain and body. For more information, visit brainmdhealth.com. Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. And stay tuned for a special code for a discount to Amen Clinics for a full evaluation, as well as any of our supplements at brainmdhealth.com.
Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a very controversial subject and one that has tormented a lot of people, both from people who struggle with this and people who love them. We're going to talk about borderline personality disorder. Often people who really struggle in relationships.
So I have a story about this, actually. I actually didn't know anything about borderline personality. And long before I met you, I went out with someone who I thought I kind of liked. It didn't go very far, though, because this person was so traumatized by someone that he went out with who he said was borderline, and he didn't know she was borderline. And he began to tell me all about how crazy this person was and made his life. This person made his life just like hell and crazy, and was like, and he asked me, he's like, "Are you borderline?" And I'm like, how do you even answer that? Like, I was like so stunned. But I realized he was so traumatized and he had such PTSD from this whole experience that nothing was ever going to come of this situation. So it just sort of ended before it started. He just couldn't trust anybody. So is that normal for someone who's ever gone out with someone with borderline personality?
It's a nightmare.
Okay.
I mean, dating them, living with them, having them work with you, it's a nightmare for them, but it's also a nightmare for the people who are around them.
Now,
let me talk about the 10 most common signs of borderline personality. Okay. So one is impulsive and risky behavior, such as risky driving, unsafe sex, gambling sprees, or illegal drug abuse. So that's just one. So impulsivity and risky behavior. 2, awareness of self-destructive behavior, including self-injury, but often feeling unable to change it.
So self-injury like cutting?
Like cutting.
Okay.
Burning yourself, asphyxiation, choking yourself. Wide mood swings is number 3. 4 is short but intense episodes of anxiety or depression. 5, very common, inappropriate anger and antagonistic behavior, sometimes escalating into physical fights, not associated with drugs or alcohol. 6, difficulty controlling emotions. 7, suicidal behavior. 8, feeling misunderstood, neglected, alone, empty, very common, or hopeless. 9, fear of being alone. I hate you, please don't leave me.
Right.
10, feelings of self-hate and self-loathing. I often will begin to suspect it in the office. If someone tells me after meeting me for 20 minutes, you're the best psychiatrist that ever lived, because I know usually in about 3 sessions, they're going to say, you're the worst psychiatrist that ever lived. So they tend to overvalue
and then undervalue.
So
I have a question. I'm assuming there's also a continuum. Not everyone is like to a 10 on this scale, and not everyone's a 0.
Right. And just so people know, the term borderline actually came because psychiatrists were having trouble is this a psychotic disorder where people lose touch with reality, or is this a personality disorder? And it's sort of on the border of those, where sometimes their behavior is so irrational that you wonder if they're not going.
Well, I've known someone who has, in my mind, all 10 of those traits. And it's really hard to get through to someone when they're in one of their episodes. So what causes it?
So there are a lot of theories about it, that early abandonment, very early trauma,
so
sexual
emotional
trauma,
or okay.
physical trauma, almost always early either abandonment or trauma. When I actually don't like giving people this diagnosis. I do it very rarely because for therapists, when they're dealing with someone who has borderline personality disorder, they'll often give people that diagnosis when they know they're not going to get better. And so
it
they
makes them
justify
right.
that, well, it's not my fault as a therapist that you're not getting better. It's your fault because it's your character. It's your personality. So here at Amen Clinics, we actually very rarely give people personality disorder diagnoses because that doesn't really honor the brain.
But what does that mean? When you say you rarely give it, is that because you're saying that personality disorders rarely get better?
That I would much rather see this from a brain perspective.
Okay.
And what I often see is they have abnormalities in their left temporal lobe, which go along with violence and the irritability and the dark negative thoughts. They often have low frontal lobe function, which goes with the impulsivity and the risky, excitement-seeking behavior. And they often have high activity in their cingulate gyrus, which we've talked about. It's where they get stuck. You're the best person, and now you're the worst person. And these people can actually become stalkers. And so I'm often thinking.
The couple that I've known of also, like, sex addiction was huge. So is that a common thing?
Common.
Okay.
And if you think of our sex addicts, that they have compulsivity and impulsivity at the same time. Mm-hmm. So they're impulsive and compulsive. And so for me, I'll use either medicine or supplements to raise both serotonin and dopamine. Raising serotonin helps the compulsivity. Raising dopamine helps the impulsivity. I'll often use a mood stabilizer as well, something like Neurontin or Lamictal, to help decrease the rages. And to me, I've found when I balance their brain and then teach them how to manage their stress in their relationships, they do so much better. And so I actually got to debate Otto Kernberg, who's probably, people think of him as the founder of borderline personality disorder and psychoanalytic theory. And I'm like, we should be looking at their brains, because how do you know they didn't have a brain injury? Or how do you know they don't have Lyme disease? Yeah, that's my question.
How does it start?
Because, if you have a brain injury, can totally make you look.
That's my question.
We saw a movie last night that we loved, I Can Only Imagine, about the
so good
origin of this Christian song by Mercy Me. And the movie was just beautiful. But he
lived in a lot of trauma.
But Bart, the main character, was raised by a severely abusive father who beat him and whose mother left. And so Bart was abandoned, Bart was abused. Bart didn't have borderline personality disorder. He was traumatized. And then as you looked at the dad, the movie really early on centers around football. And the dad, I guess, played in college and was really good. And I'm watching the movie going, the dad has CTE.
I know, and I'm getting mad at you.
The dad has chronic traumatic encephalopathy from the repetitive hits to his head, which makes him ineffective at work with his family. And Jesus ends up saving him and transforms his life. And it's like, you're like, how can Jesus fix CTE?
If he had CTE, no, that's not what I said. You said that. I said if it were CTE, he wouldn't all of a sudden, for the last part of his life, become this amazing person.
See, I went to Oral Roberts University. So
I went to Loma Linda. So
totally
same thing.
Believe in prayer.
Same thing, I do
healing.
Too. I'm just saying CTE, you don't usually see reverse that radically.
But what do we always talk about? that there are four main circles of illness, right? They're biological, so trauma. They're psychological, the trauma that Bart was raised in, and probably the dad. Social, you're really struggling in your marriage, you're struggling at work, you're struggling to be a good dad or a good kid. And spiritual. And often we find when people find their purpose, when they get connected to God, their community, their deepest sense of meaning and purpose, even if they have bad biology, it gets better. And one of my favorite stories is about Byron Katie, who's a friend of ours.
She certainly would have demonstrated a lot of this.
She was a rager. She would have totally demonstrated borderline personality. She was an addict. She was a rager. She had eating disorder.
Behavior,
she
right.
was self-destructive. But she has this epiphany, which is really a spiritual experience. She wakes up on the floor of a halfway house.
With a cockroach crawling across her foot.
And realizes when she believes her thoughts, she suffers. And when she doesn't believe her thoughts, she doesn't
Because her thoughts
suffer.
were awful.
And when we became friends, because her book was so helpful to me, we're actually published by the same imprint at Random House. And so I got to meet her. And she came and got scanned. She had the brain of a murderer. I said, oh, by the way, if you murder someone, I can help get you off. But she was the most peaceful person, right? So when you think about the transformation, don't forget that having a deep sense of meaning and purpose can help you feel better.
Okay, so my question is, so let's just say you didn't experience all of that in childhood, but can experiencing like massive major stress later in life or some sort of emotional trauma later in life trigger that kind of behavior? Or can an infection or a head injury later in life?
Yes,
okay.
Especially if the stresses stack.
Okay.
So
which means that there is hope that you can be helped.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But if the stresses stack, you lose your job, you lose your marriage, you've had a car accident, your child, you have an autistic child, these start stacking, your behavior is much more likely to get out of
erratic and
more erratic. And there's hope. You have to just deal with each of these.
And then you can balance that behavior.
And then you can balance your behavior.
So I would like to do another podcast on this because I think we should talk about people who love people with these personality issues.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. We're going to continue our talk with borderline personality, but this time we're going to do it from the perspective of someone if you love someone with borderline personality. So I can only imagine how hard this is to be in a relationship with someone like this. As I said in the last episode, I knew someone who had been, and he just could not trust. Like it was nearly impossible for him to trust
you're
again.
traumatized.
And I have to tell you, just as someone who has known someone in the family who had these traits, it's really hard. So you grew up in a family with trauma. You learn how to cope with the trauma yourself, and then you're faced with somebody who has these characteristics that you talked about, pretty much all 10 of them. If you're someone like me and it's not a romantic relationship, you just shut it out. Like there's no way this is coming in my house. Like it's bye-bye. Right. It's which is sad, but it's true because it's really, really disruptive. I mean, like not kidding disruptive. Not everyone's gonna do that. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone wants to do that.
I know. What if your mother's got borderline personality disorder? That's so common.
Right.
Or what if your wife has it and you don't want to get divorced?
Right.
It becomes chronically painful. But there are clearly things you can do that are helpful, and there are clearly things you can do that are hurtful.
But I want to talk about what it's like for the person on the other end.
It's crazy making.
So
because the borderline person constantly blames you.
Right.
And so if
you
you
start to
don't have
wonder
a
if it's
strong sense of yourself,
right,
then you sort of, you might become insecure.
So some of the things I remember were the rages, like out of the blue. Just like literally out of the blue, crazy raging. You don't even know it's coming because you thought you were having a good time, and then all of a sudden this rage starts. And then it's, you did this to me, and you're like, I did what? Like,
you have a borderline in your life if you're driving 70 miles an hour and they try to get out of the car.
Right.
I'm going to get out of the car. Stop the car right now. You're 30 miles from home. And...
Or you're in a crowded public place and they start screaming and raging, and you're just like but publicly trying to create a scene, screaming at you that you're doing something to them, and you're just like, what is going on? Like, this is like, okay, I'm in Twilight Zone. It really feels like Twilight Zone.
Right.
It's pretty crazy.
You're with someone who has borderline personality disorder when you have homicidal thoughts and you've never had them before in your life. I mean, they can just make you so mad.
Or here's one. They'll call you and talk about how they're going to commit suicide and get you all wrapped up in this whole suicidal drama to get you to help. And you go out of your way. You like jump off of, a cliff to try to help this person. And then you are trying to check on them and they're out partying and they're like, what are you talking about?
Right. And that goes with the erratic mood swings where they're fine and then they're suicidal. They recruit their support system to get upset and then they go party.
Right. So it's very crazy making for the person on the other end. So you have lots of choices. You can shut them out completely if this is something you just can't cope with and it's someone who's that unhealthy in your life and you know that it's going to be disruptive to the rest of your family. If it's
but they will just take the drama and take it to someone else.
Right.
So may not be the best solution for a family system.
Right. So it depends on your situation.
The second thing is you can get them help.
Right.
You can encourage them when they're in a vulnerable state to say, read this. How many of these 10 criteria do you think apply to you? So sometimes in vulnerable moments, that can be really helpful to give it a name, to then say there's help for this. And there's actually a psychotherapy called dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT, that has been shown over time to be very helpful for people who have borderline personality. I think they should also get scanned because what's the underlying biology? Because you want to optimize that. It doesn't always fix it, but it can be super helpful in the process.
Now, one of the problems that I would anticipate is that just the name borderline personality disorder has such a stigma attached to it. So you got to be careful with it. It's got such a stigma attached that when you try to approach this with somebody, it might be tricky because...
Well, and it may be better to call it depression. It may be better to say, we need to get you help for anxiety. I've not found using the term super helpful.
I would
In fact,
think.
I'm generally opposed to it because it sort of implies it's your fault and you're not going to get better.
Right. That's my
as
thought.
we said in the last one. The important thing is boundaries are really critical. When you act like this, I am not going to respond.
Right.
In fact, I'm not going to talk to you. Some boundaries can become really important. You have to assess the level of dangerousness. That's why having a professional who deals with people who have borderline personality is really important. And many professionals won't deal with it because they can be fairly chaotic to their practices, if you will. So medication can help, optimizing brain function using the Brain Warrior Way tools we've discussed. Psychological interventions can help, like DBT, as I talked about. In DBT, they actually use a lot of cognitive therapy, so learning not to believe every stupid thing you think, meditation, deep relaxation, social skills. Therapy is really important, learning about forgiveness and not holding on to the hurts. Because when you have a borderline in your life, it's been so crazy that anytime they get just a little upset, a little upset,
you're triggered.
Because you have all those memories, you get triggered. So you always have to be asking yourself, well, that was then, this is now. And making sure you're checking your own behavior. Because I can tell you, many people who lived with someone who's borderline, they're so mad internally that any excuse they perceive, the person who has borderline personality disorder, anytime they raise their voice or they're late or can be a small thing, the person living with them who's been traumatized can overreact and really escalate the situation.
Right.
And so forgiveness is really important. We've talked about it here. Using the REACH method of forgiveness, recall what happened, have empathy. Borderline just didn't come from nowhere, right? Altruistically give the gift of forgiveness, make a public commitment, tell the person, tell someone. And H is hold on to forgiveness rather than hold on to the hurt.
Excellent. Yeah. No, I mean, this is a tough topic. It's a very tough topic.
There's some books on it that can be helpful. Just going to find the most.
But I like what you said. I do think it's okay, as somebody on the other end, not the person who is skilled at this and who has access to medications and scans and whatever. It would seem okay to me to be able to draw boundaries around it big time, especially if you've got other people who are going to be traumatized by their behavior. So, I mean, obviously, if their problem is caused by trauma, the last thing you want to do is perpetuate that trauma to other children in your family, that type of a thing. So you don't want to have other kids be traumatized by them. That would seem to make sense to me.
There's a book by Valerie Porr, Porr, Overcoming Borderline Personality Disorder, a family guide to healing and change. And you're absolutely right. I'm thinking of, a teenager who's being raised by a borderline mother.
Oh.
And it's so painful. So you want to do whatever you can to support her, to let go, this is normal, this is not. To
make
let
sure
her
she doesn't
know
think
that
she's crazy.
Not
right.
crazy. But at the same time, she has to do the things she needs to do to be healthy and happy as much as is possible given the situation.
This is not an easy thing.
You're almost like a prisoner of war when you're married to or raised by somebody with borderline personality disorder.
This is not an easy thing.
It's not an easy thing. That's where professional help can be so important. Welcome back. Thank you so much for the reviews for the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Great information to help unlock the anxiety my daughter has struggled with for years. Clear, concise, and very helpful, if not a little insane. Thank you.
Did she actually say that?
No, I haven't.
Oh.
This is from Bonnick001. Rather than 007, this is
That's
001
funny.
from Canada. We love our friends from Canada. Thank you for the mental health check-in. Really enjoyed this podcast. Well, bless you so much. All right. There's a new study out today on can traumatic brain injury give you ADHD? And the answer was absolutely yes. I know we've talked a lot about ADD on the podcast. We've also talked a lot about traumatic brain injury. But this study was so clear that kids who experienced a traumatic brain injury, even without a loss of consciousness, years later, were more likely to be diagnosed with ADD.
So even if they didn't have ADD as kids, they could experience ADD later.
Right. In fact, it's one of the questions I often ask if I get an adult that comes to see me and they clearly have ADD of one form or another. Like, so how'd you do in school? Great. What did teachers say about you? I was awesome. They loved me. Consistent. How long did a half an hour of homework take you to get done? Half an hour, maybe 20 minutes. My focus was really good. And now it's not. And so when now it's not, when it was good, the things to think about: traumatic brain injury, were you in a car accident? Have your hormones changed?
Right.
Because that can do. Are you depressed? Because that can actually make you look like you have ADD when it's not ADD. Have you had, I had one of my patients this week get bit by a big tick. Have you gotten an infection like Lyme? I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why. Do you have mold exposure in your house? And, you know, one of the big lessons I've learned from looking at, now we're over 140,000 scans, is, did you hit your head?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I asked you that, you told me no.
They know this already. You have said, you just love to point out that I said no repeatedly. So
you also said no when I wanted you to be my sweetheart. We ended up fixing that problem, didn't we?
You just pride yourself on that. So the thought comes to me, though, with this, and that is how frustrating it's got to be for people who, I mean, now we're having a paradigm shift. We have people, you know, there's some enlightenment. But for people who have suffered for so long, and, you know, first of all, there's so many people who just absolutely didn't believe in ADD at all. And then there are those people who, if they did believe in ADD, definitely did not believe that ADD could exist in adults. So those people suffered for a long time. And I wouldn't say unnecessarily so, but it's
unnecessarily.
Yeah, okay. So unnecessarily.
If you could have fixed that problem.
Yeah. And that's kind of sad.
It's
very
super
sad.
And in fact, I actually published a study many years ago on ADD in the elderly.
Right.
That when they have symptoms, their symptoms are worse, because if you take low activity in your frontal lobes, usually associated with ADD, and then you add aging on top of it, it makes things worse. And the beautiful thing is it can be treated. One of my favorite stories is of a 94-year-old woman who came to see me, and I'm like, why are you here? And
Right.
she said, well, you helped my great-grandson, and you helped my granddaughter, and you helped my son, and I realized they all got it from me. And she said, I want to finish the paper. I've never been able to finish the paper. And we scanned her. She clearly had ADD, and I treated her. And a month later, she came back, and she's beaming because she told me she'd read her first book.
That's so cute.
And, you know, if it doesn't go away by the time you're 20, it's probably never going away.
Right. But what we're talking about here is that maybe even if you didn't have it when you were young. So the person we've been working with lately, we've mentioned this person a few times, but I want to point this out because this is really important. She was a really good student, and an awesome writer, was given a column in the local newspaper when she was 15 because of her writing ability. Really amazing. And then went off the tracks. Okay. Yes, started doing drugs, but also had multiple car accidents. So there were some issues there.
Because she had something called the Irlen syndrome.
Right.
We should actually do a podcast on that.
Right, but follow me here. So we had multiple reasons why.
This is ADD. I can't follow you.
So the point being, had just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy happen, really difficult throughout life, was either bored or couldn't maintain jobs for whatever reason. And then just recently, when you treated her ADD, it was literally like someone put glasses on her. It was crazy. I mean, I've never even seen something that extreme.
It was miraculous.
She literally was doing backflips. The next day she called me. She's like, my brain I just realized has never worked. For the past 30 years, my brain has not worked. And it suddenly works. And it's like, since then, now she's got 2 jobs. She doesn't have 1 job. She has 2 jobs, which she's excelling at.
Both of them.
And so it's just this I was thinking to myself, how painful that must have been to feel like a failure for all those years.
Well, and if you think about it, she actually had 19 car accidents. So think of the force associated. And one of them, she rolled the car 2.5 times. You were in it. But the drug abuse was also a brain injury. People don't really understand that drug abuse damages the brain. But the exciting news is you can repair it if you put the brain in a healing environment. Yeah, and it just now it makes my heart break, because when I think about how much pain there must have been, but now there's hope, and the excitement is so exciting. Well, and think about how much judgment this woman faced from me. So let's just call it like it is. When you grow up in a house with drug addicts like I did, and the effects of drugs, I wasn't kind about it. So it was, because I'm the one helping this person now. So yes, I'm helping her. So there is that. I'm the person trying to really help her. But at the same time, I'm constantly kicking her in the rear because it's frustrating to me. And as somebody... So I'm trying to think of what you are a combination of. So there's a little bit of Mother Teresa there. That is true. With Rambo, maybe, or like Liam Neeson, and Taken, right? I'm just there is a weird, and it's that's what it feels like when you're helping someone like that, because it's you're hugging them, you're encouraging them, and then the next thing you know, you're kicking them in the butt, and then you're hugging them and you're encouraging them, and you're kicking them in the butt. Anybody listening to this knows what I'm talking about. It's just a fact. All right. So the take-home lessons is, if you had ADD as a child, head injuries will make that worse. Get treated and stop doing stupid things with your head. If you didn't have it as a child, but you notice short attention span, distractibility, restlessness, disorganization, procrastination, poor impulse control, it could be the result of a traumatic brain injury that can be healed. And so for our books, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, Chapter 19 is how we rehabilitated our NFL players, or read Memory Rescue. That's the whole rehabilitation program that we do here at Amen Clinics. Oh, by the way, so many people from the podcast have been calling the call center. Oh, about the code. And using the special code, listen at the end of the podcast, we'll tell it to you, and have actually come to see us because of the podcast. We want you to share it, but we would really like for you to share the code with your family and friends by sharing the podcast, because the way people get better is not just by getting a scan, it's by changing their lives. And great, get the scan, but listen, change your life, get your community strong, and that's going to really help. Well, and we produce these to provide you with ongoing support, entertainment as well, but ongoing information and support so that you can have a better brain and a better life. Stay with us. Use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or on our supplements at brainmdhealth.com. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.